Are there any statements? I call a member for Riverina.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The situation with the floods in the Riverina has not yet been averted. There are still communities on very grave flood watch alert in the Riverina, and the situation is quite critical for those areas downstream where sandbagging has been done and people have been evacuated, and now they are just waiting and watching and hoping and praying. Elsewhere in the Riverina, there is not one nook, not one cranny of the Riverina electorate which wasn't affected by the rains of the weekend before last. Rainfall which fell anywhere from 250 millimetres right up to a record 400 millimetres, which was dumped on Mara and other parts of the Riverina, had a very serious effect on all the ephemeral streams and certainly the Murrumbidgee River from which the electorate takes its name. There were places evacuated, including Hanwood, Gundagai, Lockhart, North Wagga, The Rock, Tumut, Uranquinty and Ugali just after that initial weekend downpour of rain. Now, The Rock is not in my electorate, it is in Susan Lee's Farrer electorate, but it was very severely flood affected, as was the community of Lockhart in the Farrer electorate. Elsewhere, we've had floods in northern Victoria, in Nathalia, and the situation has been quite critical. Whilst we've had the very worst of weather, we've also seen the very best in human nature, and people have rallied together magnificently for the cause. And I'm going to single out the State Emergency Services Regional Controller, James McTavish. Now, James is a former Army officer, and he's had a lot of experience with flooding. Certainly he was involved heavily in the relief efforts in the Queensland floods of 2010 and 2011, as well as the Moree floods of more recent times. And he was a calm and reasoned a person in a time of crisis, and it was through his wonderful direction and coordination that we have avoided any serious injuries, any injuries whatsoever to speak of, and certainly there were no fatalities, and that is a tremendous thing, because I know in the 2010-2011 Queensland floods we had a huge number of deaths, including many in the Grantham township. We averted that. He made the call at 9:30 p.m. on the Monday night last, to make the extraordinary move to evacuate the Central Business District and central Wagga Wagga area. Now, that meant that 8,000 people needed to move home in the middle of the night. Certainly, he called on the efforts of the Army, the Air Force and the Navy, and we are blessed as a city to have those three services present in our city, and they went to work, door knocking. The alert went out on telephones, and of course the word spread very quickly that indeed central Wagga Wagga was being evacuated. That was an extraordinary move, as I say. It was a big call to make from the SES, and certainly a big call to make from James McTavish, but he made the right call, because as events turned out, the flood didn't go over the levee bank, which is structurally positioned to hold a flood, to withstand a flood of 10.7 metres. The flood peaked at 10.6. We were 10 centimetres away from disaster. Wagga Wagga dodged a bullet. And there were suspect areas of the levee bank, which one where a wombat had dug a hole, and another one where there was another hole had appeared, and of course the trucks went in and dumped a whole heap of dirt. There was much sandbagging and reinforcement of the levee bank in those areas, and there were other patches where the levee bank, which was first constructed in 1962 and obviously upgraded since then, but there were patches which were at risk. And as I say, we ended up being 10 centimetres from disaster. Now, had the water started to go over the top of the levee bank, it would have only taken probably 5 minutes for that levee bank to give way, and pretty soon we would have had a 100-metre wide gaping hole with muddy river water swirling in. And in the middle of the night, had that call not been made, that would have meant a huge loss of life. So there has been criticism of the SES, and unfortunately there has been criticism of that decision to evacuate Wagga Wagga. But it was the right decision to make, and anyone who wants to criticise should feel themselves very lucky that we've got somebody in the position of the SES controller in James McTavish who made that brave call but made that right decision. We had the Premier of New South Wales visit on Tuesday, and when the Premier arrived in New South Wales, when Mr Barry O'Farrell arrived in Wagga Wagga and had an aerial tour by helicopter, when he landed, the area near the local emergency control area, hundreds of people had swarmed in to start sandbagging, and it was an amazing scene. I've never seen anything like it in all my life. There were children from as young as 7 and 8, schoolgirls, schoolboys, right up to the age of 80, people who probably properly belonged in nursing homes, who were out there and holding bags open whilst men and women, some of whom were pregnant, were busy on the end of shovels and shovelling sand, and it was just like a scene out of a disaster movie. But as I say, you see the best of people in the worst of times, and Wagga Wagga people came to rally magnificently to actually fill up sandbags faster than was possible, because we ran out of dirt, and pretty soon the sand was replaced by loam, and then trucks had to go elsewhere onto farms to find anything that we could put into the sandbags to take down to the Central Business District and put in front of shops and businesses and indeed homes in the area which looked as though it was going to be inundated. We were very lucky in Wagga Wagga. Not so lucky with the people of Ungary. When I went to West Wyalong on the Monday morning to do constituent interviews, Ungary had been evacuated earlier that overnight, and Ungary is not a prosperous community, and their homes had received a huge amount of water from the Humbug Creek. Not the first time in recent years the Humbug Creek has overflowed, but the 300 residents of Ungary had been evacuated and were being housed in the West Wyalong Sports Stadium. And despite the fact that these people who, as I say, they're not the most prosperous of people, despite the fact that some of them got out with only the shirts on their backs, despite the fact that kids had lost their toys, families had lost their precious belongings, furniture destroyed, and everything else that's associated with floodwaters, these people had a marvellous resilience and a marvellous upbeat manner about them, and I was just amazed at also the work of the Salvation Army and the Red Cross and St Vincent de Paul, who moved in very quickly and helped those people, found them clothes, bought them food, and the West Wyalong community, who responded magnificently, as did communities right throughout the Riverina. As I say, the Premier arrived and offered any state assistance that he could muster for the people of Wagga Wagga, as well as Ungary, obviously, and also Tumut and Gundagai, which had also been flood affected, and where also businesses and homes had been inundated. The Prime Minister, we don't get too many Prime Ministerial visits in Wagga Wagga. In fact, I could almost name them on one hand in the last 50 years. But the Prime Minister visited Wagga Wagga on Wednesday, and the community was very pleased and that she made her presence felt. And when, after the briefing from James McTavish and other SES people, we went into the nearby emergency control centre, where the Prime Minister was greeted by a woman who, despite having her North Wagga home completely inundated, had manned the fort there at the emergency control centre, and she told the Prime Minister just how important it was to be with her colleagues at this time of crisis, much more important than to try and get whatever she could out of a home, which she said, well, it's gone anyway, so I might as well be here with my colleagues. And that sort of summed up the spirit of the Wagga Wagga people. The Prime Minister had an aerial tour by helicopter to see for herself the damage caused, and then while she stood on the Wiradjuri Bridge as the swirling muddy waters of the Murrumbidgee went underneath, she promised that she would do whatever she could from a government point of view to make sure that the people of the Riverina were not forgotten, and indeed the people of Farrer, as my colleague joins me here in the Federation Chamber, that they weren't forgotten. And to that end, I do hope that the argy-bargy that is currently unfortunately existing between state and federal governments, try as I might to sort out emergency payments for people via Centrelink, they have not been forthcoming, and I'm not putting the blame on any government in particular, but it's a situation that just needs to be sorted. It's a situation that the opposition leader called on to be sorted today. I'm sure the Prime Minister knows full well the extent of the damage caused. She saw for herself, she saw the heartache in people's eyes. I saw it in her own eyes, and I believed her when she said that she would do whatever she could to help the people of the Riverina and elsewhere in this flood calamity. and I just hope that the situation between the state and federal government is sorted in the next 24 hours so that those emergency cash payments to families and individuals can come through, because some people do not have a cent to their name at the moment. Certainly the people of Griffith had a situation which they have not faced before. The Marul Creek, which between the early 1980s and certainly 2010 had not had a trickle of water in it at its source in the Temora district, all of a sudden became a 15-kilometre raging torrent, a lake moving steadily towards the Griffith area. And once it got into the irrigation channels and canals, it created mayhem. Yenda had to be evacuated. It caused severe flooding around the Barellan area, and as I say, the Griffith suburbs of Hanwood and Ugali were not spared either. There were a lot of concerns by people in Yenda that they were evacuated too soon. That has been a problem that has been acknowledged by authorities in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. It's something that, after all the water subside and the clean-up is done, that we will need to look at. But certainly, a lot of people in Yenda were most annoyed that they had to leave their shops and their houses when the water was not really at its height and not really threatening. And then a period of dry time, hours and hours of dry time lasted. The area was cordoned off by police and local government officials, and these people were not allowed to get into their homes, which caused some consternation, which was expressed very passionately at regional community meetings held in Griffith. However, that said, there were again no injuries or deaths in the Griffith area, and look, as I say, it's better to be safe than sorry. The SES made the calls that they felt were right at the time, and the important thing is that nobody was hurt in these dire flood events. The opposition leader Tony Abbott visited Wagga Wagga yesterday, and I was very pleased to have him there. He went to great pains. I, in fact, tried to talk his office out of Mr Abbott actually coming to Wagga, because I felt people had been almost overwhelmed by the whole exercise. There were a lot of people who were very fatigued. They'd been out fighting the good fight against the floods. There were a lot of people who'd lost everything. There were also people who'd lost nothing but had the inconvenience and disruption of having their businesses affected, who were making a lot of noise and fuss and bother about the fact that their lives had been disrupted. And I did try and tell Mr Abbott's office that I thought perhaps it might have been best to perhaps come at another time, but he was insistent on coming, and as it turned out, I'm glad that he did, because rather than turn it into some sort of media stunt or circus and do a flyover and use valuable SES equipment and helicopters and resources, and rather than get in the people's way, he rolled up his sleeves and offered to help. And after a briefing at the SES, he and I went out and helped the people of North Wagga, and we walked right around the suburb. We dropped into people. One of the people who we met was an elderly fellow by the name of Alan Bell, who became quite emotional. Mr Abbott said, "G'day, mate, can I give you a hand?" And Mr Bell appreciated it, but then upon the awful realisation that he had lost everything, and with Mr Abbott and I suppose the glare of some of the national media there, he broke down and was quite emotional. And you can understand that. His feelings were reflected by people right throughout the city, and indeed right throughout my electorate, and I know the electorate of Farrer of Susan Lees. Look, we got in, we lifted some things out, we moved some fencing and whatnot, and then we also went into the next door neighbour's place and we pulled out carpets, and we got quite dirty. And I have to say that I know the opposition leader is a driven man, but he's also almost a machine in some cases. He got in, he did a lot of the heavy lifting. And anybody who thought it was a media stunt, I can guarantee that my arms and legs aren't feeling as though it was a media stunt today, because we did get in and we did help, and the locals appreciated it. They appreciated the fact that the Prime Minister came. They appreciated the fact that the Premier of New South Wales came, and they certainly appreciated the fact that the opposition leader got in and dirty and helped out with a lot of the mop-up operations, which, and let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, the clean-up operations are going to take many weeks and many months ahead. There's a lot to be done, and as I say, it's right throughout the Riverina. I was at great pains to point out in any media interviews that I did, and I did them right around the countryside. And I'll talk about the media in a minute, but certainly I was at great pains to point out that this just wasn't a Wagga Wagga flood, even though by Wagga Wagga flood standards it was very high. It didn't reach the record of 1844 of 10.97 metres when there was hardly anybody in Wagga Wagga, and certainly and didn't reach the four peaks of 1870 and prior to that date, and certainly, fortunately, didn't reach the big peak on the 30th of August in 1974 when the Murrumbidgee River topped at 10.74 metres, and many people still living in Wagga Wagga will recall that flood. Certainly the good folk at North Wagga certainly remember that flood because they were inundated then as well. But Wagga Wagga people, as are Riverina people, very resilient. They are very resilient, they are very brave, and they will bounce back from this. They certainly, there was a lot of scorn poured on those climate people who tell us that the dams were never going to be full and the rivers were going to run dry and it would never rain again. There was a lot of comment about those sorts of things, and people said, well, look at us now. It certainly is, as Dorothea McKellar certainly pointed out, a land of flooding rains and droughts. A fundraiser will be held in Wagga Wagga, but it will be a regional fundraiser, I'm pleased to say, next month. And already many bands and musicians have promised their assistance. And we're going to need a lot of assistance, both from government as well as financial assistance from locals and corporate bodies to assist those people who've lost just about everything. What needs to be done with the levee bank? Well, it needs to be heightened and strengthened. We can't afford to take the risk of having to evacuate the city again, and we certainly can't avoid the risk of a bigger flood than 10.7 metres coming down and destroying our beautiful and magnificent city. We also need to examine the releases from Burrinjuck into an already flooded Murrumbidgee Valley. The situation happened in 2010 when the Burrinjuck was allowed to flow out. We need to look at the capacity levels of Burrinjuck and certainly manage that dam better so that we aren't allowing huge releases into an already flooded system. As I say, we need to get those cash payments to those who need it desperately, and we need to sort that out between the state and the federal government in the next 24 hours. I spoke of the media. I have to say that the media responded magnificently, both commercial and certainly the ABC Radio Riverina, which is managed by Christopher Coleman. I know myself and my two sons, Nicholas and Alexander, went in and helped evacuate the ABC Radio Riverina, and there was a headline for you: Conservative politician helps rescue ABC. But certainly they were appreciative of the fact that they were able to get up to higher ground to one of the evacuation centres, indeed, at Wagga Wagga High School, and continue operations from there. And Chris and his team did a magnificent job to keep updating people as to river levels, both from Gundagai down to Carrathool and Darlington Point and all places in between, as to when people might expect river peaks and what to do in this dreadful time. The Volunteer Rescue Association of New South Wales, an organisation which actually started in Wagga Wagga in 1950 when we had a particularly wet year and we had many, many floods then. They were magnificent, as was the Rural Fire Service, the police, the SES, as I say, the three branches of our defence, Australian Defence Forces, as well as all the local government bodies right throughout the Riverina. They were magnificent, and unfortunately they spent a lot of time manning cordoned off areas and copped a bit of abuse because of it, as did SES people, as did VRA people, and that was unfortunate. Sometimes patience gets tested in these times of crisis, and some people were copped a mouthful of abuse when perhaps a helping hand might have been better. But we will learn from this flood. Next time around we will be better prepared, And certainly I cannot speak highly enough of those people who chipped in and helped. And as I say, it was an unprecedented event. You don't get 400 millimetres falling on a weekend and not cop a flood of this magnitude. But we will come out the other side stronger for it. And I just hope that people pull together as they have in the last week or so. I hope they pull together in the next weeks and months ahead to help those people who have lost everything and help those people mop up and clean up. And I thank the House.